Welcome and thanks for watching this video presentation addressing one of the TV and broadcast industry's biggest challenge of today. We will be talking about social networks and how social networks can actually be an important part of the TV concept. So first, a few words about myself. My name is Johan Bolin. I'm the Chief Technology and Chief Product Officer of Edgeware. And Edgeware has been delivering and developing products to enable TV and video services delivered over internet for today more than 15 years. And personally, I've been working in the video and telecom sector for more than 20 years now, both on the vendor side, but also on the service provider side. So now let's get going with the presentation. The somewhat dramatic title of this presentation is Getting Back the Lost Generation. And in TV and broadcast, there have always been a problem, often referred to as the age gap problem. And the age gap problem used to be that within your audience base, people within the age maybe 16 to 17 years old up to 23, 24 years old typically consumed a lot less TV than the younger and the older age groups. And this has been explained with that at this age, you spend your time outside the living room and you're doing other things than watching TV. This has started to change a bit though. So first of all, this group is growing. The gap starts earlier and it's unclear when the gap ends. And another thing that is quite different is that while these guys don't watch TV just that it has always been within the age gap, they actually consume a lot of video. They consume a whole lot of social video, they consume esports, they consume Netflix. And also, they are representing an increasingly valuable part of the inventory, which is important if you're having an ad-funded business, right? So especially since this age gap is growing and it's becoming bigger in the end, if you will, audiences aged 25, 26, 27 years old are highly valuable for advertisement. So this problem is obviously growing. And what's the problem? Then the problem is two things. One is reach. This part of the population, this audience, are not used to tune in to traditional TV. They simply hang out on social platforms rather than on traditional TV. Another thing is relevance, and that is that the formats and the content that are consumed on those social platforms or on esport platforms are curated in a very different way to how traditional TV is produced and curated. So the big question is this a gap or is this something that we simply will lose out these generations? Because the generations have been growing up with social media platforms and other online TV platforms might not get back to what we typically refer to as traditional TV. So let's have a look at how the TV and media landscapes looks today with the different kind of platforms out there and how to reach the audience or the viewers. So you have, in this example, you have a classical broadcast format, a popular example here being Strictly Come Dancing. High production being delivered over broadcast, potentially as on demand, reaching a well-defined, most often slightly older part of the population, consuming this material maybe in the living room on a device that is pretty close to a traditional TV. Next to this part of the audience, you have other platforms who are addressing other parts of the population or other audiences. A super big one being YouTube. YouTube's audience is, of course, in all generations, in all ages, but the primarily perhaps in the older, I mean, in the kids, maybe somewhat older kids and young adults. Another platform which gets a somewhat different demographic set and age bracket than YouTube is Facebook and Facebook Live, where you have slightly older audience compared to YouTube, maybe more women than men, and but still very well defined, and also a part of the audience that might not be watching Strictly Come Dancing in the living room on a traditional TV. And you have a fourth example here being Twitch, and Twitch is a platform for esport. Compared to Facebook Live, maybe this is a little bit more males, even though there are a lot of females playing games and watching esports as well today. Uh, Age bracket wise, also younger than traditional broadcast, but older than YouTube. So if you want to reach all of these different viewers, the question is, how do you do that? Well, it's unlikely that you will be able to attract all of these viewers to get to your traditional broadcast platform. So instead, a way to reach them is, of course, to do this. You take your content and you publish it on these different platforms. Uh, that can definitely be done. It is being done. And if you have the right technology, you can do this in a very cost efficient way. Now, it's not only the reach, though, that is important, because the kind of content on these platforms are pretty different. So if we have Strictly Come Dancing on the broadcast platform being an example of a very popular kind of content on TV being entertainment, right? Uh, what you will find on YouTube is typically different. It's more reviews, it's people playing games and talking about what they're doing when playing games. And the relationship you have between the sender and the viewer is somewhat quite different from the relationship you have with the sender and the viewer on a traditional broadcast platform. It's more intimate, if you will. Uh, Facebook Live, on the other hand, have a different kind of relationship than you have on YouTube, but still very different from broadcast. So this is the most, or at least one of the most popular Facebook Live channels is a channel that is about makeup. And this channel gives you tips and tricks and so on how to put on your makeup. I don't follow it myself, but I understand that that's what they're doing. Uh, and uh, and while on Twitch, then esports is again a completely different kind of content. So it's about serious gaming, playing multiplayer games in a competitive fashion. So this means that taking content from one platform and publishing it on another platform isn't necessarily a success. There's another aspect to this as well, and that is that it's not only the content as such, it's also the hosts, or if you will, who is delivering this content. If you take Strictly Come Dancing again as example, you have Tess Daly and Claudia Winkleman being the host, very popular hosts uh, of that show. And they have been in the broadcast space since, I think, the 90s, hosting several different shows and so on. So the audience watching Strictly Come Dancing, they know and can relate to these two hosts. And perhaps they viewed shows with this host already in the 90s, and maybe then they watched something else. And as they grow older, uh, they, if you will, continue to watch the content that is being hosted by these hosts. Um, if you instead look at the other platforms, you have the same kind of stars. Just like TV has always been the kingmaker, if you will, of celebrities on traditional broadcast. Today, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch are kingmakers of celebrities on their platforms. So here you have PewDiePie being an example of one of the most famous YouTube influencers. And he is, if you have seen the shows, he's playing games, he's talking to his audience, pretty much like if the audience was a friend, and it's talking all the time. So it feels less like a produced show and more like sitting next to a friend talking about what he is doing. Uh, Another example of some kind of celebrity who is using her brand, if you will, uh, when delivering messages is Suella on Instagram and on YouTube and potentially also on Facebook Live. You could easily see that she would cooperate with some kind of makeup brands or similar to produce shows on Facebook Live in order to reach her audience. And you have a fourth example here of some kind of known personality who plays an important role in the content creation and curation piece, and that is Heaton, who is a very famous e-sport person. He was one of the first professionals in esports, and he is today hosting big competitions and commenting and so on what's happening. So the audience they have, the audience of PewDiePie, the audience of Zoella, the audience of Heaton are watching the content and following these shows not only because of the content and the platform, but also because of these hosts, just as it is on traditional broadcast television. The success of your content on a platform is hence not only a consequence of the reach, it's also about how you manage to adapt the content according to the expectations of the audience. And a big part of that is the job that the influencers are doing when curating the content. So looking forward, when you have a market with all these different platforms, what could you do? Well, to start with, you should of course continue to do this. You should continue to produce popular broadcast format just as you've always done, with popular hosts such as in this case Tess and Claudia for Serious Come Dancing. But one thing you could consider is to do something like this. It would be to involve a social influencer in the production of not replacing Tess and Claudia for the broadcast version of that entertainment show, but maybe doing a additional curation of the same content, but for a different platform, and in this case being YouTube. Now, whether you like to do that only for YouTube or if you would like to do that also for perhaps like this to get it back to your broadcast platform, your online streaming platform, as well depends largely on your business models and what incentives you have to do this. So, of course, if you have a subscription model, YouTube would only offer some kind of ad-based model, and if you like to drive users from YouTube to your TV platform, maybe a way to do that would be to offer additional content or additional qualities or something like that of the, in this case, PewDiePie curated version of Strictly Come Dancing on your broadcast or streaming platform. Uh, and this you could of course do. So if this would then be successful to reach out to the YouTube based audience and those the part of the audience used to view and consume content in a YouTube fashion. You could of course do the same with Zoella in order to reach out to the Facebook or Instagram audience, or perhaps with Heaton in order to get access to the esport community and get the esport community to watch, well, in this case, Strictly Come Dancing. Of course, Strictly Come Dancing might not be a format where this works. So in all these cases, but there might be other kind of content such as motor shows, sports events, where a e-sport kind of hosting provided by Heaton and maybe a e-sport platform distribution makes more sense than strictly come dancing. So of course you need to consider which kind of influencer slash hosts fits for what kind of content and what kind of content makes sense on different platforms. But bottom line is that uh, only doing a broadcast like production with broadcast like hosting on a broadcast platform, you will likely miss out a large part of your potential audience. So, while broadcast and the TV industry have so far largely looked at internet as a additional distribution platform for the traditionally produced and curated broadcast content, we think that this needs to change. We need to look at internet as the new platform where content is created and content is curated, and this happening together with social media platforms. In the end, the capabilities of internet has been the foundation of the success for these social media platforms. And instead of fighting that, we should embrace that and take it into the actual creative processes of TV and broadcast. Um, and we call this the fusion between broadcast and social media, and internet is the platform where all this happens. So, but in order to get this to happen, there are a few technical things that still needs to be worked on. Much of this is already being addressed, and we are doing great progress. But here are a few examples of the things that we and others in the industry are looking at. So first of all, protocols suitable for the internet. The broadcast domain today is full of very old protocol that was invented prior to internet and designed from a simplex concept, meaning that the sender and the receiver can't talk to each other, which is of course uh, not at all the case when you do things on IP, or even more so when you do things on the internet. Then the receiver and the sender can most definitely talk to each other. And if they can talk to each other, you can do a lot of things much more efficient. So example of this, you can optimize what you are sending for the receiver. So it's optimized rather than compromised. It doesn't have to be one size fits all. This is the key if you want to use different sources of cameras with different resolutions and different capabilities, that the receiver and the sender must be able to talk to each other. Another thing is the management of time and synchronization. This is actually something that we are pretty good at in the broadcast production domain. And some of this needs to be developed also so it works on the internet. And we shouldn't make this synchronization issue bigger than it is. Everything doesn't have to be synchronized. You don't need to synchronize all cameras. You just need to have some kind of reference that is the same. Because if you have a known reference of the time, they can synchronize in the curation process by doing clever buffering. And part of that reference could even be extracted from the content. So if you're shooting more or less the same content with different cameras, you can today use artificial intelligence to figure out the time in order to synchronize the content afterwards. So having the tools and means to manage time is important, because if you have that, you can most often fix synchronization. And finally, we need to webify the curation process and the curation tools. And this is in order to, if you will, lower the barrier so that we can invite more creative people into the creative process of curating and producing content. And if you do this today on the web and you do this with intuitive and easy to use UIs, it shouldn't need to take more than, I don't know, half an hour tutorial, and then you are good to go producing channels with curation that is maybe not the traditional broadcast grade, but definitely good enough for many of the internet platforms, and perhaps good enough for traditional TV broadcast as well. So that said, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, any thoughts, any ideas, if you want to know what we are doing, if you have ideas what you think we should be doing, please contact me or visit our webpage www.edgeware.tv, and hopefully you will know more after that how we can help you, or maybe how you can help us. So again, thank you for listening. Have a great day.